The cameras were rolling. The bright studio lights reflected off polished desks and sharp suits as CNN hosted a special primetime debate, a rare bipartisan roundtable featuring Senator Ted Cruz and Representative Jasmine Crockett. The tension was already simmering before the intro music faded. This wasn't going to be your average political back and forth. The moderator, trying to maintain composure, welcomed both guests and introduced the topic: campaign integrity and government accountability. Ted Cruz leaned forward, that familiar smirk playing at the corner of his lips. He launched into a lecture about principled leadership and Democrats abandoning the Constitution, clearly trying to dominate the floor. Jasmine Crockett, composed but alert, sat silently, at first. But her eyes sharpened with every word Ted flung across the table. The moment was building. You could feel it. The audience sensed it too. And then Ted made the mistake. Frankly, he said, turning toward Jasmine with theatrical disdain, I don't even think some people at this table understand how our government functions. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. The moderator flinched. The audience gasped. The storm had officially arrived. Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She sat still for a second, letting Ted Cruz's condescending remark hang in the air like a bad smell. The moderator awkwardly shifted in his seat. Representative Crockett, would you like to respond? Jasmine leaned in, her tone cool and razor-sharp. Oh, I'll respond, she said with a calmness that only made what followed more intense. Senator Cruz, you're right about one thing: some people at this table do misunderstand how government works. But let me assure you, that person isn't me. Ted gave a smug laugh. Well, I'm just saying, there's a difference between activism and actual legislation. That was it. The match was lit. Jasmine's voice sharpened, her words slicing through the air. Don't lecture me on legislation, Senator. I serve in Congress. I've read the bills you vote on, when you bother to show up. While you're busy podcasting and tweeting outrage, some of us are doing the actual work. The room shifted. Even the camera crew leaned in. Ted Cruz, caught off guard by her precision, tried to interrupt. That's a little unfair, but Jasmine cut through him like a thunderclap. What's unfair is pretending to be a patriot while playing political theater. You talk about principles, but you've twisted them so hard they don't resemble the Constitution anymore, they just resemble you. The moderator froze. The live feed didn't cut. And Ted Cruz's smirk was gone. Ted Cruz shifted in his seat, visibly rattled. His usual air of smug confidence had cracked just enough for the audience, and millions watching at home, to see it. Trying to recover, he raised a hand. Representative Crockett, with all due respect, personal attacks don't change the facts. The American people want solutions, not sound bites. Jasmine smiled, but it wasn't the friendly kind. It was the kind that said, you just stepped into the deep end. Oh, I agree, she said, turning toward the camera now, her voice steady and firm. But let's talk about sound bites. You've made a career off of them. You filibuster progress and sell it as freedom. You grandstand on every issue, not to fix anything, but to get clicks, retweets, and donations. The audience started murmuring. Some clapped. Ted glanced toward the moderator, clearly hoping someone would intervene. They didn't. You want to talk about facts. Jasmine continued. Let's talk about how you fled your state during a crisis, while families were freezing in the dark. And when you got called out, you blamed your daughters. That's not leadership, Senator. That's cowardice wrapped in a suit and a soundbite. Now the studio broke into audible applause. Ted Cruz's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, visibly fuming, but before he could speak, Jasmine added the final blow of the round, and if you think I don't understand how government works, maybe that's because I'm not using it to protect corporate donors or chase cameras. I'm here to protect the people who can't afford your games. The tension in the studio was electric. Ted Cruz sat frozen, blinking rapidly as if trying to figure out how things had slipped so far out of his control. He reached for his signature move, deflection. "Well," he said with a forced chuckle, "I guess we're in campaign mode already." That was quite a performance, Representative. Jasmine didn't flinch. "No, Senator. This is what accountability looks like. I'm not performing, I'm telling the truth. And the difference between us? I don't need to twist facts to make a point." The moderator was stunned silent. He had moderated dozens of debates, but this wasn't just politics, it was a takedown. Ted Cruz, grasping for footing, changed topics. "Let's talk border security then, shall we? Maybe something you do understand." "Bad move." Jasmine leaned forward slowly, resting her elbows on the desk. "You want to talk about the border? The same border you've used as a political prop while ignoring the communities suffering from actual humanitarian crises? You've had years to push meaningful reform, Senator. Instead, you chose photo ops and fearmongering." The crowd gasped again. "But sure," she added with a steely smile, "let's talk about it. Because I've visited the border and actually listened, not just posed. And unlike you, I didn't need to bring a camera crew or a cowboy hat to prove I care." Ted's face was red now. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The moderator tried to pivot, "Let's move on to the next," but Jasmine held up a hand. "No, let's finish this. Because for too long, people like Ted Cruz have bullied their way through debates, dodged responsibility, and talked over women, especially ones who refuse to back down." Silence. Total silence. Then the applause came. Loud, long, unrelenting. Ted Cruz looked stunned. Jasmine Crockett? She looked ready for the next round. The studio was shaking, not from actual movement, but from the sheer weight of what had just happened. Jasmine Crockett had just dropped a political sledgehammer on live television. And Ted Cruz? He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 5 minutes. Back in the control room, producers were already getting flooded with notifications. Social media was exploding. "Did y'all see what Jasmine just said to Cruz? Rep. Crockett just ended his whole career. Roll the tape." Again. And again. Back on set, the moderator tried to salvage what was left of the show. "Let's, try to bring this back to policy discussion," but Jasmine wasn't done yet. "You wanted to talk policy, let's do it," she said calmly. "Let's talk about voting rights. About how you've supported restrictions that make it harder for working families, seniors, and students to cast a ballot. That's not patriotism. That's fear, fear of losing power when real democracy shows up." Ted Cruz gave a hollow laugh, clearly rattled. "You're twisting the narrative." Jasmine turned directly to him, eyes blazing with clarity. "No, Senator. I'm correcting it." The audience cheered again, louder this time. And that was the moment, the exact moment, when Ted Cruz looked down at his notes, avoided eye contact, and let the silence swallow him. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. Ted Cruz sat still, shoulders stiff, lips pressed together in forced silence. The live audience wasn't waiting for a rebuttal anymore, they were waiting for the final blow. And Jasmine Crockett could feel it. The power in the room had shifted, and it was all on her side. But instead of gloating, she leaned back and let the moment breathe. "I didn't come here to argue," she said finally, addressing the camera more than Ted. "I came here to hold people accountable. Because politics isn't a game to me, it's about lives. Real people. Real consequences. And I won't sit quietly while anyone turns it into a circus." The moderator nodded slowly, his tone more respectful now. "Congresswoman Crockett, I think you've made your position extremely clear. Senator Cruz, would you like to respond?" Ted cleared his throat, searching for words that didn't sound weak. He finally muttered, "Well, I think the viewers can judge for themselves." They already had. On Twitter, Jasmine's monologue was trending at #1. The clip of her calling Cruz a coward, wrapped in a suit and a soundbite, had already hit 1 million views. TikTok edits were flying. Headlines were being written in real time. Jasmine Crockett just redefined mic drop on live TV. Ted Cruz tried her, he shouldn't have. Back in the studio, the moderator wrapped up the segment. We'll be right back after the break. The moment the cameras cut, Ted Cruz stood up stiffly and walked off the set, not saying a word. Jasmine? She stayed seated, calm, collected, and smiling faintly as staffers swarmed her with stunned praise. She hadn't just won the debate. She had owned the moment. By the time Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the studio, her phone was vibrating non-stop. Texts. Missed calls. Mentions. Her chief of staff rushed up with wide eyes and a grin. You just broke the internet. Jasmine chuckled. Good. Maybe now someone will pay attention to what actually matters. Meanwhile, Ted Cruz exited out the side door, surrounded by aides who looked like they'd just walked out of a funeral. He avoided reporters, avoided the cameras, and certainly avoided the questions. That night, every major news outlet replayed the clash. Over and over. CNN, what Jasmine Crockett did tonight wasn't just bold, it was precise, factual, and fearless. MSNBC, Ted Cruz came to flex. Jasmine Crockett came to educate and obliterate. Fox News tried to spin it, but even their analysts were visibly uncomfortable. One panelist muttered, Cruz walked into that one unprepared. Online, the reactions were brutal. Crockett just handed Cruz a masterclass in real leadership. This is the kind of fire we need in Washington. She didn't interrupt. She outclassed. By morning, Jasmine's team confirmed it, over 12 million views across platforms in less than 10 hours. She was booked solid for the week. Interviews, op-eds, podcasts, late-night shows. And Cruz? He released a half-hearted statement calling the debate heated but healthy. No interviews. No rebuttals. Because deep down, even he knew, he lost. And Jasmine Crockett didn't just win. She owned the stage, the moment, and the country's attention. 3 days after the debate, Jasmine Crockett was still dominating headlines, not just for her fiery takedown of Ted Cruz, but for what came next. She didn't just ride the viral wave. She steered it. In an exclusive primetime interview, Jasmine addressed the nation directly. That moment wasn't about me versus Cruz, she said. It was about accountability versus arrogance. Facts versus theatrics. And I'm not done yet. The ratings soared. She launched a new bipartisan initiative, focused on voting access, disaster relief accountability, and ethical oversight of elected officials. The bill's nickname? The Soundbite Accountability Act. Reporters asked if the name was a jab at Cruz. Jasmine just smiled. Let's just say I believe in poetic justice. Meanwhile, Ted Cruz stayed uncharacteristically quiet. No viral comebacks. No snappy tweets. Even his supporters were calling for him to show some fire again, but nothing came. Behind the scenes, GOP strategists were panicking. Fundraising took a hit. Internal memos leaked, revealing Cruz had lost ground among independent voters and was visibly shaken by recent events. And then came the ultimate twist. A new poll dropped. Jasmine Crockett's approval rating had jumped 23 points nationally. Independent voters named her the most authentic voice in Congress. Young voters? They started calling her the mic drop representative. What began as a televised debate had just become a political reckoning that in the days that followed, Ted Cruz retreated into damage control mode. Behind closed doors, his team scrambled to repair the fallout from his on-air collapse. Political donors were nervous. Conservative talk shows were unusually silent. Cruz's camp announced he'd be going back to the people with a town hall tour across Texas. The idea? regain his footing by preaching to a friendlier crowd. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't letting up. During a stop in Dallas, Cruz took the stage and tried to reframe the narrative. That debate was a distraction. I'm focused on real issues, not viral moments. But it backfired. A young woman in the crowd stood up with her phone already recording. If it was a distraction, Senator, why haven't you addressed the points she raised? Like fleeing Texas during a blackout or blocking voting protections? The crowd murmured. Ted smiled weakly. Ma'am, I think you've been misled by headlines. The woman replied, no, I've been inspired by truth. The video exploded online, again. Hashtag Crockett effect. Jasmine responded not with a clapback, but with calm confidence. In an Instagram video, she said, we don't need to shout louder, we need to lead stronger. And clearly, the message is getting through. Even late-night comedians jumped in. One joked, Cruz went looking for redemption and found more Jasmine Crockett fans instead. The momentum was unstoppable now. Editorials called it a generational shift. Young voters showed up at rallies with shirts that read, unbothered. Unapologetic. Unleashed. J. Crockett, and for the first time in a long time. Ted Cruz had no idea what to say next. At BY week's end, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a trending name, she was a movement. Her staff could barely keep up with the flood of interview requests. Late-night hosts, college panels, major newspapers, everyone wanted to hear from the woman who stood her ground and dismantled a sitting senator on live television. She finally sat down for a nationally televised Sunday show. The anchor leaned in, asking, Congresswoman, what would you say to those who claim this was all political theater? Jasmine didn't miss a beat. Then maybe they've mistaken facts for fireworks. If holding someone accountable in front of millions is theater, then maybe it's time we changed what accountability looks like in this country. Boom. Another mic drop. Another viral clip. Meanwhile, Ted Cruz's polling numbers dipped even further. Conservative strategists were now whispering what no one had dared say aloud, he may not recover from this. Even some of his former allies were distancing themselves. One Republican lawmaker said anonymously, that debate did more damage than any opponent ever could. It exposed a vulnerability we didn't think he had. In contrast, Jasmine was now being floated for future leadership roles. Pundits asked if she'd consider running for Senate. Or even higher. But she stayed grounded. My job isn't to climb, it's to change the conversation, she said during a podcast. If I keep doing that right where I am, then I'm doing it right. Still, one thing was clear, Jasmine Crockett had walked into a political arena many thought she wouldn't survive. Instead, she made history. The weeks that followed felt like a political realignment. News outlets began referring to the Crockett-Cruz debate as a defining moment in modern congressional history. Commentators called it, the moment the old guard realized the new wave wasn't asking for permission anymore. Jasmine Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't dance in victory. She organized. She launched a voter engagement campaign called, Mic'd Up, Your Voice, Your Power, focused on mobilizing young, first-time voters in underrepresented communities. It spread like wildfire. Within days, thousands had signed up. Chapters opened on college campuses. Volunteers wore shirts quoting her now famous line, I'm not here to perform. I'm here to protect the people who can't afford your games. Meanwhile, Ted Cruz remained in retreat. Every public appearance was cautious, scripted, and oddly defensive. He avoided live debates. When asked about Crockett, he offered a stiff, rehearsed line, I prefer to focus on policy, not personality. But voters weren't buying it. Editorials now questioned whether Cruz could even hold his seat in the next election cycle. His opponents were already using the debate footage in campaign ads. As for Jasmine, she was invited to keynote a major political summit. Her speech? Grounded, hopeful, direct. She didn't even mention Cruz. She didn't need to. Because now, her name stood for more than just a viral moment, it stood for a generation that wasn't afraid to speak truth to power, hold their ground, and own the moment. Months later, political analysts would look back and agree, that live TV moment wasn't just a clash, it was a turning point. Jasmine Crockett's bold stand against Ted Cruz had become more than viral, it had become historic. The clip was taught in political science classes. Young debaters studied her composure, her command of facts, her refusal to be silenced. But Jasmine never let the fame change her mission. She doubled down on her work, pushing legislation, showing up in underserved districts, hosting policy town halls that were actually about solutions, not soundbites. Her approval rating soared. Even moderates and conservatives admitted, you may not agree with her, but you respect her. Meanwhile, Ted Cruz quietly faded into the background. He kept his seat, for now, but his influence waned. The firebrand image he'd once curated now looked hollow next to Jasmine's authenticity. And then came the final confirmation. On the anniversary of the debate, Time magazine released its cover, The New Voice of Accountability, Jasmine Crockett. Beneath it, a quote in bold, "Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand its ground." Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a debate. She sparked a movement. One that reminded America that courage doesn't always come from volume, sometimes, it comes from refusing to back down.